It's fascinating and maybe a little bit ironic, don't you think, that Jesus comes into Jericho. And it's there that Zacchaeus encounters Jesus, and Jesus encounters Zacchaeus in Jericho. And if you remember a little bit of your Bible history, you'll remember that Jericho was the first city that God gave to the Israelites as they entered the Promised Land. And if you remember, what was unique about Jericho is they had these impenetrable walls. These walls that were keeping the people of God from experiencing the promise that they had been given. And they march around it, and they march around it, and they march around it, and then they all shout, and the walls come a-tumbling down. We could do all the kids' Bible songs today. See how many we can get in. And there in Jericho is where Jesus enters, and this city that was given to the people of God, this city that said something about the promise of God, has now become a city that creates new and different walls that separate Zacchaeus from the promise of God coming through town. That the very people of God have become a wall to Zacchaeus experiencing the promise of God. I worry that sometimes we fall into that same category. I worry that at times we as people of faith can turn inward and forget about people who might want to see Jesus. I worry that at times we lose focus of what it is that Jesus tells us that he came to do, to seek and to save what was lost. And we find ourselves worried about feeding the found as opposed to seeking the lost. On this day, well, technically tomorrow, 500 years ago, Martin Luther nailed a bunch of theses to a door that were essentially reminding the church of what its mission is and how sometimes things get so complex and so difficult that we put up these barriers between people and God. And we don't mean to, but sometimes it happens. That we end up creating walls that aren't meant to be there in this fortified city that God had already given the people of God in order to let them know about the promise of God. It's the people who became the wall to this man experiencing the promise of God walking through the city. Time and time again, we hear stories, or I hear stories so often about very well-meaning people who become walls to other people seeing and hearing about who Jesus is. I talk to people who discuss this concept of deconstruction. And most of the time when people talk about deconstructing their faith, they'll point to an experience or a place or a time or some difficult thing that took place in a church or with a community of faith or with a person of faith, and they'll talk about this in a very difficult way. And I acknowledge the pain of that moment. I acknowledge that oftentimes churches who are full of people who don't have it all together, who don't have it all figured out, can unintentionally do damage. But we shouldn't walk away from Jesus because of people. We shouldn't walk away from Jesus because of people. Jesus continues to seek and to long to be close to us. In fact, Zacchaeus climbs a tree. That's how he solves the problem of this wall, this wall of people that he can't see through, that he can't get through, that he can't see and seek Jesus like he set out to do. And Jesus sees him up in this tree. Now, a man of stature, a man of importance, a man like Zacchaeus in this culture, to climb up in a tree was a little bit unbecoming for a chief tax collector. That's what he did. Climbed up in a tree in order to see Jesus. And sometimes we've got to think a little bit outside of the box in order to help people to see Jesus, in order to be the kind of place, the kind of people who are trees, who are helping other people to get above the fray in order to see Jesus, in order to see the person who longs to see them, who longs to be close to them, who longs to spend time with them, because it's Jesus' very presence that changes Zacchaeus' life. Zacchaeus, today I have to eat at your house. Zacchaeus scurries down and they go to his house. It's the presence of Christ that changes Zacchaeus.